the 2024 FOCAC Summit, China-Africa cooperation reached a new milestone in modernization. Relations continue to strengthen, highlighting the unity and potential in global South collaboration. How should we view China and Africa's joint effort towards modernization? And what positive impact is China bringing to the global development? To discuss this, we are joined by Harvey Dzodin, former legal advisor in the Carter administration and senior fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. Hello, Mr. Harvey. Thank you for joining us today. First, China has been actively supporting Africa's modernization process. Do you think China is helping Africa in a way that aligns with African priorities?
I believe there's an absolute alignment. Since its founding in 1949, China has been solidly aligned with Africa. For me, a key moment was the conference in Bandung, Indonesia in 1955. That conference gave birth to the non-aligned movement, the Third World, and to what we call today the Global South. At that time, most of Africa were Western colonies being exploited for their resources, and the West exploited their colonies. The West resisted giving them the independence that would come in the 1960s. China supported this development. The Western colonialists, they didn't. New China believed and still believes in Africa for the Africans, and has believed that since its very founding. Sadly, the mindset and this East-West and this North-South divide persist to this very day. The West exploits Africa. China partners with Africa. FOCAC, founded in 2000, is a recognition of this legacy and this long-standing partnership between China and the African continent.
Indeed. Given such strong partnership between China and African countries, what potential do you see?
There's so much potential cooperation. The West sees Africa as a place to still be exploiting Africa's resources. China sees Africa as a place to partner with Africa and its more than 50 countries, the countries that are represented at FOCAC. And there's immense synergy between them. It's forecast that Africa will have prolific growth, not only in people, but also in development by mid-century and by the end of the century. It's a continent full of potential, but it's a continent that has many needs. It needs to modernize. It needs infrastructure. It needs development. It's very backward. Africa has been held back for a variety of reasons. But China possesses the technology that can take Africa itself to the next level, and also can bring Africa more into the position of being a partnering country with the rest of the world. So we should no longer look at Africa as just a place that can be exploited or from which resources can be taken, but as a partner in development. And that development will include things like what China is very good at, the technology. Take the fact that China is now the world leader in renewable energy. Africa needs energy. They need renewable energy. They're going to face many crises in this environmental era of global warming. And so China can provide Africa with wind power, with water power, and with solar technology that will help power it. that will take people's lives to a new level, the same way that New China took people's lives and is taking people's lives within China itself to a new level. So I think it's literally a case of the sky's the limit for the cooperation between China and Africa. The relations between the two have never been better, although they were always good.
Behind China-Africa cooperation, the collaboration of Global South nations is also strengthening. How do you think Western countries perceive the increasing influence and collaboration among Global South nations?
I think many of them, especially the former colonial powers, have some regret about the growing influence of the Global South countries. Countries that were number one never like to become number two, three, or four. And I believe that this increasing influence among the global South countries bothers the former colonial countries and it bothers countries like the United States that did not support until very, very late the independence of these African countries. But when you look back over history, China was always behind African independence. The West was not. And the West doesn't value Africa except to exploit its resources. It doesn't respect Africa. So China is not that way. And so I think the West is anxious about the increasing influence and collaboration of the Global South, while China welcomes it because China is a partner with Africa. The West, no, not so much, unfortunately.
An increasingly open China is crucial for international cooperation. For instance, the Belt and Road Initiative is a reflection of this openness. What impact do you think this initiative has had on global development?
Unlike many politicians in most countries, especially Western countries, where politicians talk the talk, they don't walk the walk. China does both. China delivers on what it says. And since 2013, it's built this Belt and Road Initiative into a way of connecting the entire world, connecting it by high-speed train, connecting it by sea, connecting it in ways that weren't possible before. I believe the Belt and Road is like an artery in the body that connects the heart to the rest of the body. The Belt and Road is a heart that's connecting the rest of the world with each other. This is China's way to be a partner, to not to be a master-servant relationship with other countries, but to work with other countries. It's always been the model of New China, and it continues to be the model up until right now.
As the 2024 FOCAC Summit successfully concludes, this summit not only strengthens the bond between China and Africa, but also sets a shining example of how nations can come together in pursuit of common goals and working towards a shared future. Speaking of an increasingly open China, reform, development, modernization, and opening up were frequently mentioned in the communique of the third plenum. What signals does this send to the world?
I think the third plenum sends a very important signal. The third plenum is always important, and that's because they focus on major economic and political reforms. They're not so much about the present as they are forward-looking. They're like a compass. They're pointing the way to China's future. In 1978, it was the third plenum that pointed to China's reform and opening up that resulted in China's decades-long economic miracle, in which changed China from an agricultural society into the global powerhouse that it is today. So it's not surprising that words like reform and opening up figure so prominently this year. The communique indicates that China is entering a new era that rebalances public and private market forces, encourages both foreign investment and domestic consumption with the goal of modernizing China's governance and economic systems by 2035 and completing key reform tasks no later than 2029. The terms modernization and development point to replacing old, unsustainable growth models, for example, based on real estate, with state-of-the-art productivity, given China's tremendous advancement in science and technology. The signals the third plenum is sending to the world is that China continues to innovate as it has for much of its storied history. Many people in the West have little or no idea of China's storied history. Maybe a few remember ancient China's four great inventions that were highlighted in the 2008 Beijing Olympics that were state-of-the-art in their era: the compass, gunpowder, papermaking, printing. They were as advanced way back then as China's leadership is today in core and emerging technologies. Fields like digitization, robotics, and renewable energy, for example.
Speaking of modernization, what do you think are the key characteristics of Chinese modernization?
To me, the key characteristics of Chinese modernization are the societal migration from the old and the stale to the new and the exciting. So, having lived in China for 2 decades, what impresses me is that China never rests on its past achievements, as great as they were, but always has its eye on the future. And under the leadership of the Communist Party of China, they never stop innovating. It reminds me of what the famous Austrian management consultant Peter Drucker once said, that the best way to predict the future is to create it. Chinese modernization is doing exactly that, creating the future with competent leadership in the fields that matter today and tomorrow.
New quality productive forces are other key emphasis in China's development. How do you understand this concept?
I look at it in the long sweep of Chinese history, starting at least 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. So most people in the West don't realize that China has this very amazing history, that China was one of the richest countries in the world hundreds and thousands of years ago, and that they made great inventions. And we spoke about FOCAC, and it's amazing to me that in the Ming Dynasty, that there was an admiral, a Chinese admiral called Zheng He, who had state-of-the-art ships that went to Africa, to the Middle East, and some people say went to North America and Australia. And so that ancient technology that China possessed and never stopped inventing, China has continued to innovate. So what I understand new quality productive forces to be is just a continuation of that ancient trend. China is now a world leader in so many technologies. And because it's a world leader in so many technologies, it's going to replace those unsustainable models with new productive forces which are the height of technology, and that are going to lead China, Asia, Africa, and the world to new levels of development that were never thought possible, even let's say a half century or 70 years ago.
At the same time, Guangdong is a leader in technological innovation. What's your impression of Guangdong, and how do you view its role in China's development?
I've been going to Guangdong for many decades, starting in 1988. I could experience places in Guangdong and compare them to now. So I have to say, Guangdong is the engine driving China's new productive forces. Guangzhou is an ancient canton. It has its own great history. And Shenzhen, which was once a small fishing village, now it's a great metropolis. It's a high-tech capital of 13 million people. It's home to innovative companies known around the world, like Huawei. And I also want to say that your area, Guangdong, it's the anchor of China's Greater Bay Area. I'm really impressed with what I've seen in Guangdong province. I'm so impressed with the progress that's been made in such a short period of time. And I hope the people who visit China will not just visit Beijing and Shanghai, although they're wonderful places, but that they'll get down to South China, including Hong Kong, too, and the Greater Bay Area, Macau, and so on, and see this amazing transformation. Of course, they'll have to visit some museums to see how backwards the area was even half a century ago, even less than that. And I hope that if they do visit, they'll appreciate how China and China's leadership has pushed China to develop so fast when other countries are merely treading water or not advancing so much. And again, seeing is believing.
As someone who lived in China for decades, you have been working to help the international communities better understand China. What aspects of China do you think should be better communicated to the world?
Well, first, I think that under the leadership of the CPC, China's whole process, people's democracy, works. It's using the proven tools of five-year plans and a personnel system that promotes only those who achieve the goals at higher and higher levels of responsibility. I've seen this with my own eyes, visiting the poverty alleviated village in Sichuan called Shibadong. It was once a isolated village that had no economy. Now it's connected by fast trains and good roads. People have made a quantum leap there from poverty to being richer and to having a satisfying and a productive life. And it's not just that I've seen this with my own eyes, but there's happiness in China, and it's proven survey after survey. Chinese people themselves rate the government the most highly in the world, for example, by the annual Edelman Trust Barometer. So I have to also say that seeing is believing. And I hope that people will come to China and not just go to Beijing and Shanghai and the usual places, the Great Wall, but to go into China's beautiful interior. It's amazing places and geographical mountains and rivers and things like that that are even hard to imagine. So I don't think anybody should take my word for it or any expert's word for it, because seeing is believing. People should go and see for themselves. I fully believe, because seeing is believing, that people have to go and see for themselves and not believe any experts or read books or newspapers. China's transformation from when I first visited in 1988, it's amazing. It's more modern than many Western cities, and people, I don't think, really know that. But I think for the 144-hour visa or whatever form of travel is taken in China by foreigners, it's very important to meet Chinese people. I'm not talking about meeting a concierge in a hotel or a taxi driver who maybe they can't communicate with, but to find a way to meet Chinese people. And today we call it people to people connectivity. It's what the Belt and Road has done. It's what China has done more generally. We need to find ways to connect people in the different countries. And language should not be any kind of hindrance because there's excellent Chinese and other technology that does translations in real time. And so I believe that meeting Chinese people is a key. Why? Because there's a lot of differences politically in the world now. But people in China, people outside of China, we're mostly all the same in almost every respect. And if we can see each other as people, not as objects or enemies or whatever, then I think we're going to have a better world, a more friendly world, a world that will persevere beyond the environmental crises and political crises that we're now facing, to go beyond our 21st century into a 22nd century and beyond. So we're moving from a traditional world where the US and the West has been leader to a multipolar world. And it's important that we get to know each other. Everybody should be talking to each other and communicating with each other. We have the technology. China's invented a lot of the technology. And so there's no better way than people to people connectivity.
Lastly, looking ahead, what are your expectations for China's future economic and social development?
I say it's maybe encapsulated in the saying onward and upward. I expect great things from China. It's true that China now faces some economic headwinds, but all countries face economic headwinds, and economies have their ups and downs. But because of the way China is governed with full process democracy, I believe that China has not only a rich history, a rich present, but I believe China has a richer future and a future that is marked by more and more common prosperity. I think China is going to take the next step so that more and more people are prosperous. And it's because of the leadership. This kind of thing doesn't just happen. And we're going to live in a multipolar world. It's not just going to be a world that's led by China, the US, and EU, for example. It's going to be led together, hopefully, through the United Nations and other international entities like FOCAC and others to have a shared future together. And I believe that that's going to be done because there's going to be other countries that come to the fore that are not world leaders today. Countries in Africa, certainly, but maybe later. But countries now like Turkey, countries now like Indonesia, that are going to become very prominent very quickly and are going to assume a place in global leadership. Hopefully, because China wants to be friends and is friends with everybody, we'll have a model where the world is working together to take it to a new level that's never been seen before. in the history of our world.
Just as Harvey said, we are entering a multipolar world, and hopefully it will be one that is led together by all. That's all for today's show. Thank you for watching. See you.